Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet Playoff Preview presented by OTGBasketball.com. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, two great podcasters, Jac Manuell and Preston Ellis. What's up, fellas?
Howdy, guys.
Oh, what's going on, guys? Thanks for having me back, Nick. And Jack, nice to finally meet you, sir.
You too, mate. Always good to meet a fellow professional.
I wouldn't call myself a professional, more like a buffoon with a microphone.
But Preston, he does the Bird Calls, great podcast. Jack is co-host of JBT and the Brooklyn Buzz, both great podcasts. Check them all out. But today we're talking about the playoff series, Blazers and Pelicans, and arguably maybe one of the best matchups in the first round.
I think.
Yeah, I reckon.
Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I don't want to interrupt the professional, but I was going to say that Mr. Pelicans over here is obviously going to think it is as well. But I think this is probably one of the best series with probably the Heat and the Sixers. I reckon if this one doesn't go 6 or 7, I'd be heavily surprised. And there's stars aplenty in this one. These teams are both in relatively good form. I reckon this is going to be a heck of a series.
Yeah, a lot of people are pointing to the 76ers and the Miami Heat as a must-see television show, to speak. And I think this one has even more exciting storylines. Of course, you've got the Cinderella story in New Orleans. You kind of have the battle of the small market teams, the David versus the Goliaths, only this time it's two Davids. But you've got the star power in Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, Yusuf Nurkic, Jrue Holiday, and Anthony Davis. You've got the feel-good story in the Pelicans battling back without DeMarcus Cousins. And also you've got the storylines of Alvin Gentry and Dell Demps, two guys who were considered lame duck general managers and head coaches. And now seemingly they've locked up probably the next 3 years going into this offseason. We had our new owner, Gail Benson, come into the locker room and congratulate all these guys. Everything has changed. Everything is so different than it was last year for the Pelicans. And of course, Portland has had their own very successful run. They locked up the third seed about 2 weeks ago, and they almost lost it here in the past 2 weeks. But getting that big victory over Utah Jazz cements a bit of momentum going into this battle with the Pelicans. And you're absolutely right, Jack. These are going to be 7 fantastic games. The 4 matchups this year have been split 2-2, all very tight. It's going to be very exciting, Nick.
For sure. And like you mentioned, the previous matchups is 2-2 all year long. DeMarcus Cousins obviously will not be playing in this series. He played in the first 3, not in the last one. Is there anything we can take away from the previous matchups between these two teams?
Absolutely. On March 27th, the Pelicans faced off with these guys without DeMarcus Cousins, and Anthony Davis severely sprained his ankle, but he did play through it. He ended up with 36 points in his 2 matchups against these guys. He's averaging 36 points, 11.5 rebounds, 4 blocks, 3 assists. This guy he just loves playing against the Trailblazers. And there's so much. I don't want to monologue. I want to make sure that you ask me the questions that I'm specifically supposed to answer. But in that game specifically, the Pelicans have to limit what Nurkic and Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are able to do in these matchups. And in that matchup, for the most part, they limited Yusuf Nurkic, but they did a wonderful job of shutting down CJ McCollum, who was just 3 of 19. And that's something the Pelicans have done very well this year, is keeping one of these backcourt mates from really exploding on them. It's just unfortunate that Damian Lillard's 41 points, 20 in the fourth quarter, was just too much for them to overcome. There's only one defensive backcourt mate with Jrue Holiday, and he can only guard one of these guys. So Jrue Holiday is effectively going to shut down one of these guys. The Blazers will be able to pick which one it is, but is that other backcourt mate, whether it be CJ McCollum or Damian Lillard, going to be able to do enough heavy lifting to overcome a Pelicans team that's going to push the pace and score a lot of points?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, mate. You make, because I think that they needed to almost turn their energy towards Damian Lillard, because if we're talking like on-off numbers and who has the bigger impact, yes, CJ is an elite prospect and probably one of the best shooting guards in the league, but Damian Lillard is the heart and soul of this Blazers squad. And I think who knows what we could get out of playoff Rajon Rondo if he's engaged as well, and even if he's taken on Damian Lillard. We saw what happened when he was with the Bulls last year. He almost took the Celtics out in a really, really wild series. So I think that even Rajon Rondo is going to have a real impact in this series. But for me, it's all about Damian Lillard. Like you mentioned, Preston, the fact that 20 points in that last quarter, he became a dad, and then he just wanted to get all those points and get out of there so he could be with his girlfriend. He was absolutely outstanding. But Lillard and Davis, I mean, you got the clash of styles, one of the best point guards. Both of these guys should be first-team All-NBA. It's going to be super duper exciting just to see this real clash of styles. And like Preston mentioned, you know, the Pelicans like to get out in transition, like to get the ball moving, whereas the Blazers sort of like to slow it down a little bit and sort of keep it a little bit sort of ISO ball, but also sort of a half-court sort of game. So I'm really excited for game one. And, Mo Harkless, hopefully he can come back soon enough as well, so both teams can be at full strength.
Where do you think the Blazers can attack the Pelicans in this series? Where's an area where the Blazers can kind of take advantage of the Pels?
Well, there's something that I wanted to correct Jack on. Mo Harkless is not going to be playing in this entire series, which is an incredible boon for the Pelicans because he's just been getting better and better all season long. He's shooting 42% from three on the year. But if you'll remember, in October, November, he was shooting somewhere around 20%. So since December, he's actually been shooting close to 50%. With him off the floor, Al-Farouq Aminu's numbers have dropped. They just haven't had as much spacing. And I was just talking to Stephen DeWalt, and he gave me a bunch of great information about how the Blazers have had to respond and how much pressure that's put on the backcourt to seemingly do more and space the court for them. Now, getting back to Nick's question, where the Blazers can attack the Pelicans, there's a couple of different areas. One, of course, the critical one that they're going to have to do to not only manage possessions, but also to slow down the contest, because the Pelicans are going to want to push. They want as many possessions as they can get. They love fast break, is to get rebounds, offensive rebounds and defensive rebounds. They're top 10 in the NBA in both. And when Emeka Okafor came off the floor for the Pelicans the last time these guys faced each other, they dominated on both sides of the glass. Al-Farouq Aminu and Nurkic both got over 10 rebounds. Also, in addition to that, the Pelicans can turn the ball over because they create so many assists. They have the best assist to turnover ratio in the NBA. But with all that passing, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be deflections. The Blazers are 29th in the NBA in creating deflections, so they need to stick their hands out a little bit more and create more opportunities, create more turnovers. We know these guys are really great in defense, but can they create those opportunities for their offense, for those easy transition points? And is that what they want, in fact, to keep pace with the Pelicans, or do they want to slow things down and kind of frustrate the Pelicans, make the Pelicans play half-court offense? Because there's nobody better in the NBA in pushing the tempo, but if they can slow them down and force Rajon Rondo to create those amazing alley-oops that we've seen from Anthony Davis night in, night out, if they can force them to do that, maybe they can frustrate the Pelicans and kind of take them out of their rrhythm.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Preston. The only reason I mentioned Mo Harkless is that NBC Sports Northwest reported that Wednesday that Harkless could return by the time that the series shifts back to New Orleans. So I'm not sure how credible that source is. But yeah, I think the rebounding thing is a huge sort of they're obviously top 10 in terms of rebounds per game, rebound percentage. Another little stat that I was looking at, they're also fifth in second chance points per game, which is one sort of thing I think it obviously relates to the offensive rebounding. But when you've got a guy like an Anthony Davis, one of the best rebounders in today's game in both ends of the floor, defensive and offensive, there's going to be a lot of burden on him. So I think Jusuf Nurkic really needs to sort of make that a key focal point for him. Make it on the offensive and defensive end, make Anthony Davis work. Like Preston mentioned earlier, Davis was so dominant in that most previous performance on March 27. If Nurk can have an impact on the boards, then I think that's going to go a long way to getting the Blazers to win. They're also, ninth in defensive rating. We know how good their defense has been, especially during that earlier winning streak. So it's certainly going to be a clash of styles, like I mentioned earlier. But if the Blazers can stay locked in and sort of slow the game down, then I think they can get it on their own terms. I think it can go a long way to getting the W in this series.
Preston, do you think the Pelicans are going to try to protect Anthony Davis in a sense and kind of, prevent him from having to be on Nurkic a lot to kind of reserve his energy?
I just wanted to apologize to Jack. I just looked it up, and this is fresher than 24 hours, but you're absolutely right. He is expected back the middle of next week, so they could see him back in the lineup by Game 3 or Game 4, and that would be huge for the Blazers. To answer Nick's question, this was something we've been talking about for the past month, how much we loved having Emeka Okafor on the floor, specifically in this matchup. I was just talking, as I said, to Steven, and we talked to David McKay, award-winning journalist over at Blazers Edge. He's one of their editors over there. Those guys do a great job. If you haven't checked out their site, make sure that you do that. Right now they're covering the Nike Hoop Summit, which is based out of there as well. They have a big game there tomorrow night. But I love having Emeka Okafor out there because Jusuf Nurkic struggles against these guys who play fundamental defense, who kind of do the right things, set the right picks. He struggles against those guys. Against guys like Anthony Davis, who take a lot of risks and they kind of, go out block hunting and steal hunting and, try to help other defenders. Jusuf Nurkic is squirmy enough to capitalize on those guys and use his body and use his cunning to squeak out rebounds and to get against the glass and get a couple extra second chance points. But I think that Alvin Gentry has kind of already tipped his hand as to what he's going to do in this series, because the Pelicans have been playing playoff basketball ever since Saturday against the Warriors. And he's done something that he hasn't done all season long. And that's that he's given Nikola Mirotic, DeMarcus Cousins minutes. So what that means is they've been starting together, but Mirotic has been playing the 5 for large spurts of time. And when Anthony Davis comes out the floor, usually Anthony Davis plays the entire first quarter. And then the first 6 minutes of the second quarter, Mirotic comes in and he plays center. So he might be matched up against Nurkic. And while that may give the Blazers an advantage on the board, Nurkic is going to have a hell of a time chasing Mirotic out to the 3-point line. When the Pelicans do that small ball lineup of some version of like Rajon Rondo, Ian Clark, or Drew Holiday with Solomon Hill, Darius Miller, and Nikola Mirotic, these Pelicans are going to play fast. They're going to space out the floor. And this might be a place where the Blazers can capitalize on the Pelicans if the Pelicans aren't shooting particularly well. But if the Pelicans are shooting well, they might play Nurkic right off the floor.
It's certainly a good point, because you mentioned that pace that they got, Preston. They're first in the league when it comes to pace. You know, they're 4th in effective field goal percentage and 6th in true shooting. So they know how to shoot the 3-ball. They know how to get the right sort of looks. You know, they're also 3rd in scoring and assists per game. So it's really sort of who's going to be able to stop it. Can they stop them in transition? I think the Blazers' defense is good enough. But like you mentioned, I think when they go small, I mean, that's when, you know, a lot of teams can get played off the floor. We all know about the Golden State Warriors death line and what's going on in Houston right now. But the Pelicans, I think, have been underrated in that aspect. I've watched a few of their games, and I really like what Emeka Okafor is doing. Nikola Mirotic has been absolutely outstanding, and his ability to space the floor. And I think his overall energy that he brings to the squad, like he's not a horrible defender by any means either. So I think that there's a lot of aspects that I think that Alvin Gentry can do to sort of, you know, sort of counter, I guess, somewhat to what Terry Stotts is doing. It's going to be a really interesting coaching battle as well.
How much do you think it'll help the Pelicans if they're able to kind of push Nurkic off the floor? You know, earlier in the season, Nurkic did have some issues with stats, and they weren't playing him in the fourth quarter because of small ball. Do you think it would really help the Pels if they're able to push Nurkic off the floor, or it's not that huge of a deal?
I don't think it's that huge of a deal, and that's a hard thing to say about a guy who I think is one of the best 10 centers in the NBA. The Pelicans are well willing to let him have his 20 points and his 10 rebounds. He's not going to kill them. What they don't want to have happen is they don't want CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard to both light themselves on fire, because that would be absolutely damning for the Pelicans. But whether it's Nurkic out there or Ed Davis, who I'm sure the Pelicans will see a lot of run from, Ed Davis is actually somebody who might potentially scare the Pelicans even more, because he is a very active rebound, a great defensive presence. The Pelicans are number 1 in scoring in the paint since DeMarcus Cousins went down, and they were 2nd in scoring in the paint when DeMarcus Cousins was with them. So they celebrate on easy shots. They like to attack the rim, and they like to get underneath the rim. A lot of those is those alley-oops to Anthony Davis, but a lot of that is cutting players like Drew Holiday, like Ian Clark, like Etuan Moore. And Yusuf Nurkic is not going to stop those guys. Al-Farouq Aminu is going to be counted on a lot to go over and help on those type possessions. But if the Pelicans should get out to a quick pace and get to a lot of scoring, you might see Ed Davis play Yusuf Nurkic's role there. But if that's the case, then you're also opening up the floor to Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. And the Pelicans are going to, I think that's going to be the story here, is the Pelicans are going to make both Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum beat them. They're definitely willing to let Nurkic get his 20, and they're definitely willing to let one of those guys, McCollum or Damian Lillard, go off. I'm not sure which one it's going to be, but both of those guys are going to need to play well and score a lot of points to keep up with the Pels.
As a fan and as an expert, Preston, who would you prefer to go off? Would it be CJ or Dame? Or is it obviously both of those guys, when either of them go off, it almost leads to wins on more than one occasion. But do you have a preference that you would sort of like to see Alvin Gentry target?
I think the formula for the Blazers that has worked so well is that Damian Lillard has kind of carried these guys, and you get to the fourth quarter, and then one of those guys has to be the difference maker. And CJ McCollum is so efficient in that regard. But against the Pelicans, the tables turned on that one, and Damian Lillard just carried them all night long, scoring 41 points. And I think you have to take your chance there. Damian Lillard, I'm such a fan of him, such a fan of his game. The Pelicans almost got him with Anthony Davis in the 2012 draft. The Pelicans took Anthony Davis first overall, and they were poised at 10th overall, and they were trying desperately to move up, I think, to 7th, where he ended up going. But they were going to package that pick and the next pick. So I love his game. I don't think there's a whole lot the Pelicans can do to slow him down. You can put Drew Holiday on him and kind of limit him, but I really honestly and truly believe that if you put Drew Holiday on CJ McCollum, you can nullify most of his game. Drew Holiday has been that good this year. But with that being said, if Drew is on Damian, I think they're just going to be cunning enough with their screens, with their cuts, with their pick and roll to create opportunities. And Damian Lillard is just a good enough player that he's going to take advantage of those. I think the target here is to shut down CJ McCollum.
I think that's a really actually interesting strategy because, like you said, Dame's just going to get his. There's not really much you can do. He hits a ton of tough shots, a ton of tough threes from deep. CJ, I think, like you mentioned, Drew Holiday, one of probably the best perimeter defenders this season, who's finally starting to get some love, could definitely do work on CJ McCollum. But from the Pels perspective, where can the Pelicans attack the Blazers? Other than pace. We mentioned pace a lot.
I definitely talk about pace and transition, fast break. This is something the Pelicans do better than anybody else. Another one that I wanted to mention was points in the paint. That's something we touched on briefly with Yusuf Nurkic. Nurkic is not a defensive stopper. He's not somebody who can really limit guys like Drew Holiday and Etuan Moore, who are so good at finishing at the rim with both hands. And Etuan Moore has that great runner. He's really consistent and reliable for about 11 to 15 points per game. So too is Ian Clark. And Rajon Rondo has become more and more aggressive. We've joked that playoff Rondo has been activated. And we saw that against the Clippers and the Warriors and last night against the Spurs when he went off for 19 points, 14 assists, and 4 steals. So that's going to be number one. If the Pelicans can limit their turnovers, that'll just create more possessions for them and give the Trailblazers less opportunities to slow down the pace. And other than that, we know what Anthony Davis is going to do. We know what Drew Holiday is going to do. Can Nikola Mirotic keep this streak going? It's been 5 straight games of all-star level basketball. I think it's 26-13 over that span. If he can keep playing like that, if he can continue being that efficient offensively, as well as contribute what he does defensively, I think the Pelicans might have a real shot in this series.
Yeah, he's one of those super hot and cold players. Like we saw early in Chicago this season when he came back from the facial fracture, he was lighting it up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he's got some real consistency about him since going to New Orleans. I think he's found a situation where it's fit well. Greg Monroe was rumored to go there, but I'm glad that the Pelicans got a guy who can space the floor and almost fits their system that little bit more. But yeah, the points in the paint that Preston was mentioning, they're second in the league for that at 52.1 points per game. Third in fast break points. So we know what they want to do. They want to feed Anthony Davis down low and also find their shooters on the perimeter. The Pelicans will be relatively good at sort of forcing tough shots. But at the same time, I think if the ball moves fast enough, Rajon Rondo is one of the most creative passers in the league. We can say what we want about him in terms of sort of padding his stats, Russell Westbrook style. But in the playoffs, this guy's a real commodity. So I think they've got a really good balance in terms of their team cohesion that Preston's been mentioning there. It's whether the support cast from both teams can stand up. We know Dame's got a ball out. We know Davis has got a ball out. Who's going to step up outside of that?
You think that could be a strategy for the Pelicans in a sense where, they're trying to make everybody but Damian and CJ McCollum kind of score, force Evan Turner to create things. And we mentioned Mo Harkless possibly not being in there. There's just not a ton of guys in that team that are consistent scorers other than Dame and CJ.
There's going to have to be guys who make each other work on each end of the floor. Damian Lillard's probably going to be matched up with Rajon Rondo because Rajon Rondo is kind of squirmy like Nurkic, and then he kind of just sits back and creates scoring opportunities for other players. But then if you fall asleep on him, he'll take you off the dribble and he'll go right to the cup. And you'd have to think that's where they're going to hide Damian Lillard so he can kind of keep up his strength so that he can really lead the charge against the Pelicans on that end of the floor. But so too on the other side, where are the Pelicans going to hide Rajon Rondo? Some people have Rondo matching up with CJ McCollum and Drew matching up with Dame. I don't think that's where the Pelicans are going to go with this because we've seen other teams really take advantage of the Pelicans when the Pelicans try to do that. I think that Rajon Rondo is going to be matched up with Evan Turner. And like I mentioned, it's going to be up to Evan Turner to punish the Pelicans every single time that they do that. If Evan Turner can punish Rajon Rondo and create scoring opportunities for other guys, create some spacing, get to the hoop, score some easy buckets, that might take Rondo off the floor. And then you bring Ian Clark onto the floor. And I know that he's been a Blazer killer in the past, but he was virtually non-existent the last time they played these guys. He's going to have to make himself known as one of the 3 bench players who's going to get a lot of minutes in this game. And it's going to be up. It's going to be up to both squads to take away some of each other's weapons. And on that end of the floor, that's an opportunity where they can take away Rajon Rondo. And if you take away Rajon Rondo, that mitigates the pace, that slows the game down, that takes away those easy assist opportunities. He really gets the team going on that end of the floor, not just himself, but just the confidence that he gives those guys, the communication, having him out there as like the de facto coach, the floor general, as they like to refer to him. If you can take him off the floor, that could be a huge advantage for the Blazers.
Yeah, his leadership can't be understated. You know, we know what he can do with the ball. Without the ball is another story. But I think, yeah, you mentioned Evan Turner there. I think if you're looking for spacing from Evan Turner, then I think it's going to be a bit tricky. But I think he has an ability as well where he's improved somewhat in his passing game as well. So I think that's going to be a really nice battle going over there. So I think at the same time, when it comes to playoff series, these support casts always play better at home. They feed off the energy of the home crowd. So I feel like the Blazers, if they can get, if the Pelicans can sort of nullify that early, get up to a sort of semi-hot start, keep it even in the first and second quarter going into the half, then they've got every chance to steal the away win, which is all important, you know, when you're going into a 7-game series, which is likely that this is going to be.
Well, talking about role players and matchups, what are the key matchups of the series? What are the ones that matter the most?
Before I get into that, I just wanted to say quickly that Jack mentioned home court advantage, and you know the age-old expression that the series doesn't start until somebody loses a home game. This one might be a bit trickier because even though the Trailblazers, I think, are 29-13 at home, the Pelicans are really good on the road. They're both 24-17 on the road and at home. So you might see a couple of disconcerting losses and wins on each other's home courts that you might not expect. Don't be alarmed. That's just the way the Pelicans play, and the Blazers, so too, are very good on the road also. So this might be, and that's what makes this so exciting, is that you might see the improbable happen. You know, teams beating each other on each other's home court. Your question, Nick, was about X factors, and I think we've definitely delved into Rajon Rondo and into Nikola Mirotic. If I could bring up some other names, Darius Miller and Solomon Hill have not been good lately. They've been, in fact, very, very bad. Darius Miller is the best shooter that the Pelicans have, but he's downright timid offensively. He can be scared off the three-point line, and when he is, rather than driving to the paint and get an easy bucket, he just gives the ball up quite often to Rajon Rondo, who is not a scary shooter. So he needs to be more aggressive, and so too Solomon Hill, ever since returning from his torn hamstring. He just lacks the lateral quickness that made him an elite perimeter defender. So he hasn't been shutting those guys down. He's been playing with the reserves, which really hasn't killed the Pelicans yet. But in this instance where you'll have CJ McCollum and Evan Turner probably heading up the second unit, these guys can take advantage of him, and he can't attribute anything offensively. So he's a great opportunity for somebody like a CJ McCollum or an Evan Turner to hide on that end, kind of play a bit of free safety, create some turnovers and some easy fast break opportunities. So the Pelicans definitely, in the early second quarter, the first six minutes of the second quarter, and at the end of the third quarter, they're going to need positive basketball from Darius Miller and Solomon Hill.
Yeah, the support casts are going to be all important. And I think we're talking about the matchups. I think Jrue Holiday is going to be one of the key guys to this series. We've mentioned his name that many times, you know, defensively, but also offensively as well. Can he get his own as well? Can he create his own shot? Can he get a nice sort of pick and roll game going with Anthony Davis? We know Rajon Rondo loves that sort of style, but, you know, Jrue has been playing a bit off ball. Obviously, you know, there was a lot of questions on him going into the season. He's, you know, answered them and then some. I'd be surprised if he's not all NBA defense first team, if not second team. But, you know, his role in this series is probably the most important out of any of these sort of 30 players that are going to be suiting up. So I think Jrue Holiday versus Dame versus CJ, whoever he guards, you know, the first and second quarters and down into the clutch, it's going to be, you know, up to him. He's going to have that responsibility on him. And, you know, we haven't really seen Jrue in those sort of situations, really. You know, he hasn't had the history of, like, you know, sort of playoff clutch performances. We've seen that from Rondo. We know what we get from Davis. He had that season a few years ago where he was huge against the Golden State Warriors. But Jrue Holiday is, you know, he's sort of somewhat inexperienced when it comes to that sense. But I think he's going to have a big series. You know, he's proved it this season. And I think, you know, it's about which team can perform the best. We know that the stars are plenty. It's the stars-driven league. But it's about the support cast that we've been talking about. The guys like Darius Miller, Evan Turner, Mo Harkless, Al-Farouq Aminu. Who's going to step up and support their stars the best? Who's going to go a long way to winning this series?
So would you guys say the deciding factor in this series is most likely going to be the supporting cast?
I'll go.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm going to go ahead and say no, just from the Pelicans' perspective, just because Solomon Hill and Darius Miller really haven't been contributing anything on that end. And you've got Ian Clark coming off the bench, and he's pretty much good for 10 points per game, and Etuan Moore is pretty much good for 10 points per game. The Pelicans' major factors, Rajon Rondo, Drew Holiday, Anthony Davis, and Nikola Mirotic. You know what you're going to get from Holiday. You know what you're going to get for Anthony Davis. The two guys who really have to come up big for the Pelicans are playoff Rondo and Nikola Mirotic.
I think in the case of the Blazers, I reckon it is a little bit more on the support cast. And if you want to call, I guess, CJ McCollum a support cast outside of Dame, because we know this is Dame's team, and he's been the one that's absolutely balling out and is an MVP contender. So I think if CJ sort of heads that sort of support cast for guys like Nurkic, who's probably the number 3 guy, and then their wings, can their wings make enough perimeter shots to sort of drag out and sort of create a bit of space for Nurkic if he gets a few post touches, make Anthony Davis work a bit on both ends of the floor. I think basketball's a team game. We know it's a star-driven game. We know the stars end up winning the games at the end of the day. And I think because Damian Lillard is so clutch, with LeBron James probably the best clutch performer this season at least, it's going to come down to, can the other guys make their shots and, create more space for a guy like a Damian Lillard? Because for me, you're only as good as your 7th and 8th guy. And when the rotation sort of tighten up a little bit, I think these teams are quite even. They both have, the same sort of amount of stars. But the support cast for me is going to be one that sort of stands out. Whose bench is going to step up? Whose 4th and 5th guy, whose 4th and 5th starter is going to stand up? Are they going to do enough to sort of, give that little bit of energy and juice, as Nick likes to say, to sort of get their team the W when it really matters?
Yeah, I agree. Both you guys made great points, especially from the Pel side and the Blazer side. But let's get to it. What is your prediction for this series? Who's winning it?
Jack, you go first.
I will go. I guess I should go first because I don't want to offend Preston, because I'm going to go Blazers in 7. I'd be surprised if this series doesn't go 6 or 7. Like I mentioned earlier, these teams are just too good. I think either of these teams could have been in the top 4. I'm surprised with the way the Pelicans were going, that they, I guess they lost a little bit of gas going late into the season. But a really nice sort of thing that Preston mentioned about the fact that they're both so good on the away floors. I think that's going to change the entire series. I like the energy that the Portland Trailblazers crowd gives. I'm going to be interested to see what the Smoothie King Center and the Pelicans fans can bring with the playoffs coming up. We know that during the regular season, they're occasionally, a bit hit and miss. But I think they're going to come out and really support their team in all its glory. So I feel like there's a little bit of an edge there for the Blazers. So I'm going to go Blazers in 7.
And this is somewhere where I might nod. I guess the lack of education I have on being a Trailblazers fan, I know just so much more about being the Pelicans. And one thing that I know that does nod in the Pelicans' favor is responding to adversity. And like Jack so aptly mentioned, whenever these two teams play, some unexpected things are going to happen just based on how each other plays on each other's home court. Both these guys are going to play very confidently no matter where they are. So there could be some turning of the tide, like the Pelicans might be able to steal game 1 and steal game 2. And how would the Blazers respond to that, going 1-1 to New Orleans? How do they respond from adversity? Because we've seen from the Pelicans with the passing of Tom Benson, with DeMarcus Cousins' Achilles injury on the biggest night of their season, taking down the unstoppable CP3, Clint Capella, and James Harden at the time. The lame duck manager and head coach, as I mentioned, Anthony Davis, all this national hype about trading him to Boston, the Adrian Wojnarowski interview, the Rachel Nichols interview. This has never stopped for the Pelicans. Drew Holiday and Anthony Davis have been carrying this team all year long. Even before Boogie got hurt, they were top 10 in minutes played. These guys are used to this. Nothing's going to scare them. They're not going to be a deer in the headlights, so to speak. So how is that adversity going to affect Portland when it does happen to them? Are they going to be able to bounce back? Because I already know that my squad is, and so I'm going to pick the Pelicans in 7.
Wow, you both made compelling arguments. It is a very tough one, and I'm telling you, my soul wants to pick the Pelicans, but I'm going to go with the Blazers in 7. I think if the Pels win, though, I think they might win in 6. And like you said, Preston, if there is some type of adversity for the Blazers, I could see the Pelicans kind of jumping all over that. And the one thing that gives me some faith in the Pelicans in this series, it's always been that same thing. When you have the best player in the series, you always have a chance to win. And obviously, Anthony Davis is the best player in the series.
You could argue that. I think one of the conversations that we're going to see next week, and who is the best prospect of the 2012 draft, because of course those two guys went head to head, and they were so explosive in their rookie rookie years. Anthony Davis was a bit quieter. He was limited to, I think, like 17 minutes per game on the season. Anyway, I'm monologuing at this point, but that's definitely going to be a central storyline is maybe is Anthony Davis overrated? Maybe Damian Lillard's the best player. Damian Lillard, of course, is going to finish in top 5 in the MVP voting. So you can say these guys are pretty much equal with what they mean to their team. But like I said, I think the major storyline here is Jack is something that we can't look away from this is going to be a great series. This is going to be must-watch television. If we get anything less than 6 games out of this matchup, I think that is going to be the critical disappointment because these teams are so evenly matched. They take away what each other does so well. It's just going to be I can't look forward enough to Saturday night. I think it's going to give us everything that we're expecting and more.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, like I said to start the pod, I think this is probably going to be one of the best first-round series. But before we get out of here, who's your MVP of the series?
Well, if Blaze is in 7, then for me it's going to be Damian Lillard. He's going to hit some clutch shots. We know he's one of the best perimeter guards in the NBA. He's going to have a tough time against Drew Holiday, but Damian Lillard's an MVP candidate for a reason. So for me, it's going to be Damian Lillard.
I think it's going to be Anthony Davis just because he's kind of the Peyton Manning of the New Orleans Pelicans. He's always going to put together his 30 points and his 12 rebounds. And, he's the number 1 overall pick and he's got the commercials and that kind of thing. And he's also going to play all NBA level defense. But I think it can't be understated how much the Pelicans are going to rely on Drew Holiday in this one, not just offensively. They're going to need 20 points and 7 assists and 5 rebounds from him night in and night out. But he's going to be tasked with chasing these guys all night long. He's going to play 40 to 42 minutes, and every single one of those minutes is going to be either chasing CJ McCollum or chasing Damian Lillard. He's not going to get a break in any of these games. So while it might go to Anthony Davis, I think very quietly the Pelicans have to win this one with Drew Holiday.
Well, you heard it here. Preston has the Pelicans in 7. Jack has the Blazers in 7. I have the Blazers in 7. That wraps it up for today. As always, thank everybody for listening. Make sure you check out Preston's The Bird Calls pod and Jack's JBT pod. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the playoffs.